Good evening, everyone. My name is Tony Mancuso, and I serve as the Communications and Outreach Senior Specialist for the Summer Health Professions Education Program, also known as SHPEP. For those of you who are unaware, SHPEP is a free 6-week summer enrichment program for college freshmen and sophomore students who are interested in the health professions. To learn more, please visit shpep.org. Tonight, our audience is comprised of active scholars, SHPEP alumni, pre-health advisors, and anyone who's interested in learning more about the optometry admission test. That being said, I'd like to introduce Nick Huson. He serves as the manager of test administration for the optometry admission test at the American Dental Association and will lead tonight's presentation. Please be sure to use the Q&A feature to ask any questions during tonight's session. And as always, SHPEP webinars are posted on our YouTube channel within a week of the live viewing. Nick, feel free to take it away.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you to SHPEP for giving me the opportunity to go through this presentation on preparing for the OAT. This presentation, I will walk through the general process of how to go about taking the OAT from the very beginning through to getting official scores released. I will also be going through some common pitfalls that people who take the test fall into, as well as giving some study tips on how to best realize your potential when you are taking the OAT. A lot of this is just cobbled together from the years that I have been serving in this role and the questions that I have received from people who take the test, as well as the issues that I have seen people run into that are avoidable, so long as you are aware of them. With that, I will jump right in. I like to start just explaining the purpose of the test, which is that the OAT is designed to measure general academic ability and comprehension of scientific information. And now the purpose of a test directly informs how the test is built, from the content to how it is administered to how it is scored. And so in the case of the OAT, we want to make sure that the test content is one, measuring what we are purporting to measure in the different subject areas on the test, and that the scores reflect that as well, and that administration is standardized and secure so that the scores can be compared to each other across years, not just within 1 year. We conduct periodic validity studies where the optometry programs will give us feedback on how students are performing in school so that we can correlate their GPA to how they performed on the optometry admission test. And we have seen throughout the time that we've been doing the validity study that there is a significant positive correlation between performance on the OAT and GPA in the optometry program. And so it is our firm belief and the belief of the optometry schools that the OAT is a valid measurement tool to be used in the admission process. That said, even though all the optometry schools do require students who are applying to take the OAT score is not the only measurement tool that they use to make admissions decisions. So there isn't necessarily cutoff scores through which you are guaranteed admission into an optometry school just because you performed that well on the OAT. The first step that you will want to take when you are taking the OAT is to go to the website listed here, ada.org/OAT/PIN. We use the PIN as a personal identification number that will allow you to submit an application for the test, to log in to see your scores, to log in to request that your scores be sent to other schools, should you need to do that. Once you have gotten your PIN on that website, ada.org/OAT/PIN, the general OAT website is ada.org/OAT, and I do very much recommend that students familiarize themselves with this page and all of the information that is contained on it. This is everything that we want you to know about the test. Specifically, if you see in the bottom left of the slide, it lists the OAT guide. When you submit your application to take the test, you will be asked to confirm that you have read and understood the OAT guide. It contains, in addition to the general information that you will need to know, all of the rules you are agreeing to follow as you take the test. And so I certainly recommend that you do read through that, since you will be agreeing that you have read it when you apply for the test. And when I see students run afoul of rules that they didn't know existed, it can really set them back if they weren't aware that they were doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So I do strongly recommend that you familiarize yourself with this website and with the OAT guide in particular. So this is the test administration fees for 2021. So the base fee is $500. That includes official score reporting to all optometry schools, so long as you pick them at the time you are submitting your application to take the test. It will automatically fill all of the schools. You can select not to have it sent to all of the schools. You can select to have it sent to some, but not others. My recommendation is always that you pick to have the scores sent to every school, whether you plan on applying there or not, since it is free to do so at the time you submit the application. If you want to add schools later after you've submitted the application, even if it's before you've taken the test, as long as it's just after you submitted your application to take the OAT, it's $45 per school. And a lot of times people will ask if it will seem strange to the optometry schools to get scores for someone who has not applied to their program. If you don't apply, my guess is that the schools will never know that they received your scores, because they will not have a reason to look for them in the system we use to disseminate scores. There is also an eligibility extension fee that is less than the fee for the test. If you see there at the bottom, you get a 6-month window of eligibility that starts the day the application is processed, which is usually the business day after you submitted it. For instance, if you submitted your application to take the OAT immediately following this webinar, we would more than likely process the application tomorrow on Tuesday. If you are not able to test within that 6-month window of eligibility, you can pay that fee to get an additional month and a half, an additional 45 days on your eligibility window. That's if there weren't significant extenuating circumstances that prohibited you from testing during your 6 months. If you are sick for a significant portion of the 6 months, or other extreme circumstances come up that stop you from being able to take the test, get in touch with us and we can work with you on that. This exists just if you don't feel ready by the end of your 6 months. There's not any particular reason. You just did not necessarily have time to study or prepare, and you would like a little bit of additional time. That is an option. The OAT is administered at Prometric test centers. They have test centers throughout the United States. In all likelihood, there is one fairly close to you. We don't often hear that people have trouble finding testing appointments at a test center close to them for the OAT. The test is taken in a secure, standardized environment. There is biometric check-in, that is fingerprinting. They will take an electronic fingerprint for you. You put your finger on a little scan pad. There's no ink involved or anything like that. I bring this up because that was suspended due to the pandemic. That was suspended starting in May of 2020, but has been reinstated, I believe, at some point in April of this year. But so do be aware that they are going to do the biometric check-in. There is also video monitoring, both of where you check in to take the test, as well as the testing station that you're seated at while you test the whole time. I bring this up just so that people are aware, one, that they are being watched for test security purposes at all times. But if something happens during your test that you feel is going to impact your scores in a negative way, don't worry that we wouldn't be able to confirm what you are telling us happened. We would be able to get the video and and be able to tell what happened during your test. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I just wanted to make sure that people are aware. So the test is taken on the computer. There are detailed test specifications in the OAT guide. It's on page 5 of the guide, which can be found at the website that I listed earlier. The breakdown of the questions is that there are 100 questions in the Survey of Natural Sciences, 40 in biology, 30 in chemistry, 30 in organic chemistry. There are 50 reading comprehension questions, 40 physics questions, and 40 questions in the quantitative reasoning section. And the schedule for the test breaks down as follows in the table there. There is a total allotted time of 5 hours and 5 minutes, 4 hours and 5 minutes of actual testing time split across those 4 sections. There is the optional post-test survey at the end. And I would ask that when you take the test that you do take the time to fill out the post-test survey. We really do review the feedback that we get, and based on that, consider making changes to the testing program itself or to the procedures for submitting applications, scheduling tests. We do very much try to identify the pain points for people taking the test and do our best to alleviate those. So don't think that no one is reading what you write or looking at the answers you give. I am reading them and looking at them. The optometry admission testing program provides reasonable and appropriate accommodations in accordance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. This means that if you require accommodations outside of normal testing procedures for a disability or an impairment that is confirmed by documentation, we will provide that. Generally, this looks like additional time to take the test, time and a half or double time, a separate testing environment, or a separate testing environment so that you can have, say, diabetic supplies if you are diabetic. I would note, most importantly, that if you take the test with accommodations, we will never report that information out to anyone, not to the schools when they receive your scores, not to the optometry centralized application service. As a matter of fact, not even to you. If you were to come back to us 3 years after you took the test and say, I need documentation that I took the test with accommodations, we would not provide that because we do not confirm to anyone, including yourself after the fact, that you took the test with accommodations. The request form that you would use for requesting accommodations is on that website, ada.org/OAT, under apply to take the test. You would email that form along with the supporting documentation into testingaccommodations@ada.org. That email address is just the best point of contact for any questions that you would have in that regard. So before I get into sort of more specific study tips, I do always give the disclaimer that we do not endorse any third-party study materials or courses. This is not to say that they would not be helpful. We have to give this disclaimer because none of them got the information that they are giving from us. So we cannot guarantee that it is accurate or that it will be helpful. I have had it come up in the past that a third-party study course was giving advice to students that actually was in violation of the rules for the test. And so some of the people who had taken that course got in a little bit of trouble, or at the very least weren't allowed to do some of the things they were told they could do to help them try to get a better score on the test. So if you do make use of third-party materials or courses, I would just, again, strongly recommend that you consult our website and the guide to make sure that you understand the rules and to make sure that all the advice you are being given fits in with our rules. And if you find anything in that regard that you have questions about, it is always better to get in touch with us through any of the means listed here, either by email, by phone, or by live chat, just to confirm with us whether information that you are being given is accurate. We do offer practice tests to help students familiarize themselves with the test format. These practice tests are not designed to give you an indication of how you will perform on the test. We do not give scores. We do not say, based on your performance on this practice test, we predict this would be your score on the actual test. The purpose is just so that you know what the different question formats you're going to be seeing will be, that you can familiarize yourself with how the test works on the computer so that there are no surprises there. But it is not necessarily a study tool in terms of being able to give you a benchmark for how prepared you are. And just at the bottom there, I would say there isn't any specific one trick that I can give people, or one source of study materials that I can point to say this is how you raise your score on the OAT. How you prepare is going to be a highly individual matter. What works for some people may not work for other people. So just make sure that you know yourself and know what is going to be useful for you, know what studying techniques are going to be useful for you, and then make sure that you understand how things are going to go at the test center and all the different rules so that you can feel relaxed and comfortable when you show up to take the test. I feel like anxiety is something that gets overlooked a lot when people are preparing for the test. I think that can have a significant detrimental impact on people's scores if they just don't feel comfortable while they're taking the test. So do everything you can to make sure that you are fully prepared and confident as you go into your test. These are the pricing for the practice tests that I mentioned. The individual modules are just specific to each of those sections. You can take them however you want. You can do a few of them and not others. If you want to do all of them, you can obviously do that by doing the full practice test. The modules are identical to what's on the full practice test, so just be aware if you do the full practice test, you will have seen everything that is in the individual modules, and vice versa. And the practice test is an hour shorter than the actual test. There's also less questions if you look at the number of items listed in each area, but the time is designed to mimic what is actually on the test, so you can get a sense of how much time you have per question and how you can sort of strategically allocate your time to make sure that you're getting to all of the questions on the test. And as I said, scores are not provided for the practice test, and the questions cannot be reviewed after the test has been completed or the full time has elapsed. That is, you cannot go back into the test after you've finished it to look at some of the questions. It is treated, as I said, very much like the actual test itself, where the only time you can see the questions is while they are live and while you still have time to be answering them. So this is my general breakdown of how you should prepare for the test that I have gleaned just from talking to students and faculty over my 15 years with the Department of Testing Services. First, review those test specifications that appear in the guide. It is very specific about the subjects that are going to be covered in the different areas on the test. You will not necessarily be tested on everything that is listed in the test specifications, but you will not see anything that is not listed in the test specifications on your test. Based on that, identify your areas of strength and weakness, and then build your plan around that. Obviously, studying more in the areas where you believe you're not as strong as the areas where you excel. Consult with your faculty and advisors, with the educators who know you and know your strengths and weaknesses, and know how best you interact with material, so that they can help you set your plan. On that OAT website, ada.org/OAT, there's a list of reference texts. It is not exhaustive, but it is the list of textbooks that the people who put the questions together consult while they are putting questions together. So just in case your course texts and materials differed from what they used in order to put the test together, I think that's a very useful set of books that you can probably find in your school library. And I think the most important thing is to make a plan and then stick to it. And the most important thing there, I think, is being realistic and honest with yourself. I can't tell you how long you should study for the test. I've talked to students who studied for 4 or 5 hours a week for a couple weeks before the test and did fine. I've talked to other students who treated this test, sort of studying for the test, sort of like a full-time job, where they were studying between 6 and 8 hours a day for 8 weeks heading into the test. It really just depends on what you feel like you need to do and how much material you need to go over before you're going to be fully prepared for the test. And so, well ahead of time, just make sure that you put a plan in place that you can stick to, so that if you tell yourself you need 100 hours to study this specific material, make sure that you've given yourself enough time to get through all of that, and that you're not making it so that you're going to have to cram for the test. In my experience, cramming for these tests raises anxiety more than it prepares you for the test. As I said, know the rules and be prepared so that there's no surprises for you on test day. And then it comes up a lot that people will not get a score that they like the first time they take the test, or not get a score that they feel like is high enough for them to get into the school they would like to get into. And so they study the same way that they studied the first time, they take the test again, and they get basically an identical score. And then they'll ask us, why I studied more, how did I end up getting the same score? And honestly, that's the most likely outcome. If you felt prepared for the material presented on the test, that is, if you weren't seeing questions that you just didn't know the answer to because you hadn't studied it, if you felt like you knew the material and you just study the exact same way that you had the time before, you are probably going to get the same score if you have to retest. The test is designed to be an accurate measure of your ability level. And so the way I sort of try to explain it to people is, to get a higher score, you need to raise your ability level. And so I think that requires you to come up with a different method of preparing yourself to take the test, trying to work on your ability to recall the correct information in the moment when you need to bring it to bear on the test. But don't just anticipate that if you do what you did for your first test and just do more of it, that it will necessarily raise your score, or certainly that it would raise your score to the level that you're trying to get it to if you need to retake the test. And just to reiterate, make sure that you give yourself enough time to do all of these things so that you're not rushing to take the test. I always recommend to people that they submit their application to take the OAT at least 2 months, preferably 3 months in advance of their desired test date. That way it's more likely that you can get the date you want at the test center that makes the most sense for you, and also so that you can when your test date is, and you can set your plan working backwards from there. This is what the test specifications look like within the guide that I mentioned earlier. So this starts on page 5 of the OAT guide. Should anything ever change, we would post about that on the website, and it would be posted in the guide. There are not any scheduled significant changes for the OAT. In 2022, the bio test specs are scheduled to change as it says there. So when we get closer to 2022, the specifics about that will be posted on the website, and they will appear in the 2022 version of the OAT guide, which is updated on an annual basis. These are the monthly testing volumes for the past 5 years, just to give you a sense of when people generally take the test. As you can see, there's a focus on the summer months, specifically August. 2020 is a little bit of an anomaly. As you can see, in March, there were less than half of the average test takers that we get, and then no one tested in April because the test centers were closed for that entire month. And then similarly in May, and then through a little bit of the next few months, it took a while for that backlog of students who would have tested in March, April, or May to be able to take the test, as test centers were operating at a reduced capacity for most of that time. Overall, most of the country is currently operating at full capacity. We're not hearing that there's any trouble finding testing appointments. That could all change as more information comes out about the Delta variant and ongoing complications due to the pandemic. We may see states or localities implement stricter requirements, and our testing centers do have to follow those guidelines. So there may be limitations put on testing as we move forward, but currently most states are operating at 100% capacity with a mask mandate. You have to wear a mask into the test center and while you are testing. That mandate has not been dropped at any Prometric centers in the country. When you set your appointment, you are allowed to reschedule that appointment. Obviously, you're not locked in to the date you picked for the whole time. You would contact Prometric directly. We at the Department of Testing Services do not do any canceling or rescheduling. We cannot help with that, but Prometric does that. Not the test center itself. You can't reschedule by contacting the local number for the test center where you're taking the test. It can be done through the Prometric website or through their 800 number. There is a fee for rescheduling. The fees are listed in this table here. The closer to the date of your appointment you get, the more the fee is. That is because the closer to the date of your test that you cancel the appointment, the less likely it is that Prometric will be able to fill that testing slot with someone else. So you can see if you do it within a few days or even the day before your test, it's a pretty significant fee. So this goes back to what I was saying in terms of making a plan that is realistic and that you can stick to, because there are costs associated with it if you are not able to take the test as you scheduled it. If you have an appointment scheduled and you don't show up at all, the fees that you paid for that test are forfeit, because we have to pay Prometric for the test whether you took it or not, because you were scheduled to do so. And obviously they couldn't test anyone else in your place. If that happens, you will be required to submit a new OAT application and pay the full fee, the full $500 over again. So again, make sure that you have a plan in place that isn't going to lead to that happening. That said, if there is an emergency or something like that, there's a lot of leeway in this way. You know, if you wake up the day of your appointment and you have COVID symptoms, for example, we obviously would not expect you to go to the test. In fact, we would very much ask you not to show up at the test center. So if that is the case, if you're sick, if some other emergency, family emergency should come up, you would just either notify us or Prometric, provide documentation for whatever you say is the reason that you need to reschedule or that you have to, we're not able to show up for your appointment, and we can work with you to get you set up so that you can schedule a new appointment. There are always exceptions to be made under extreme circumstances. Just to give a sense of how frequent this happens, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking when I was talking about having to pay to reschedule that that's not going to happen to you. It's about 1,500. This is from 2019 because the 2020 numbers are pretty skewed due to the pandemic. But in 2019, almost 1,500 people, or about 1 in 4 people who took the test, had to reschedule their appointment at some point. So they had to pay the fee to do that. And then similarly, 137 people did not show up to their testing appointments for reasons unrelated to an emergency. These are people that just did not show up to their appointment and were forced to repay the full fee. So that's about 1 in 20, I guess, a little bit less than that. This is the checklist that we put together just to make sure that on test day, you are not going to run into any problems. In order to take the test, you need 2 original current, meaning non-expired IDs. The primary has to be government issued with picture, name, and signature. The secondary does not need to be government issued, does not need to have your picture, can just have your name and signature on it. Most often people are going to use a credit card or debit card as that secondary ID. So like a driver's license or passport and a credit card or debit card, so long as you've signed the back, those are fully sufficient for those IDs. Going into the bottom left, I would just note that the names that you put on your PIN when you're registering for your PIN have to match with the names on the IDs that you present at the test center. The IDs have to match both each other and your application, or you could run into some issues. The middle name is not as much of a concern. A middle initial versus a full middle name is considered matching. So there's some leeway there. However, if there's a middle name and there isn't a name or initial on your ID, that could potentially present problems. Or as in the example given there, if there is a hyphenated name on your ID and only one last name on your application, you would likely be stopped from testing for those reasons. So I would always just suggest, if you think there may be a discrepancy between your IDs or between your IDs and your application to take the test, just reach out to us and explain what you think the issue may be, and ask that we weigh in on whether that would be a problem when you show up at the test center. Always better to ask us ahead of time than to potentially run into issues on test day. Another area that gets a lot of people in trouble as they take our tests are the issues of going to your locker during unscheduled breaks. You can take a break from the test at any point. I mean, obviously the test is structured so that you don't have a lot of time for each question on the test. But if you have to run to the bathroom or something like that, you can just get up and walk away from the computer. If you do that, though, you cannot, under any circumstances, access your locker, because it would be very difficult for us to tell whether you're looking at study materials, which you cannot do during an unscheduled break. So if you take an unscheduled break and you go to your locker where they have you put your personal belongings as you're checking in for the test, and we cannot tell what you are doing, your scores could be voided. You would have to pay to retake it. A penalty may be put in place that you're not allowed to test for a year. There's a number of things that could happen. So just be very aware not to go into your locker on an unscheduled break. During that 30-minute break in the middle of the test, where there's no test content live, you could not go back and change any answers. You can do whatever you want. You can get on your phone, you can look at course texts, you can look at study materials. It's just while there is test content on the screen, and you would be able to go back and change answers. Be very careful not to do anything that could be suspected that you were looking at useful material that would help you for the test. And then also make sure that you empty your pockets. As you're being checked in, the Prometrics staff will ask you to turn out your pockets to make sure that there's nothing in them. And so hopefully it would be caught at that time, but do not accidentally go into the test center with something in your pockets. That could also result in the voiding of your scores, if we cannot say absolutely that it was not something that would help you with the test. And then in the bottom right, this is something that comes up, I would say every now and then, but that something goes wrong at the test center that you believe is going to negatively impact your test. To give sort of an extreme example, if the power goes out. If the power goes out at the test center and then they reboot the test and it starts where you were, but there's less time. You believe that you lost time on the test due to the power outage. you should ask them to rectify the issue. Anything that comes up, ask the test center staff to rectify whatever the issue is. If they do not or cannot rectify the issue sufficiently for you, then stop testing and go home. Email us immediately letting us know what happened. We will review the case. As I said, there's video monitoring throughout the entire center, so it is generally pretty easy for us to confirm what you would be telling us happened. You would have to do that within 5 business days or within a calendar week of your testing appointment, letting us know in order for us to be able to do something about it. And so as long as we can confirm what you say happened, as long as we agree that it would have negatively impacted or likely negatively impacted your scores, we will get you set up to take the test again free of charge. We would not release the scores from that test, since they would not be an accurate reflection of your abilities. I've seen people who put that something happened into that post-test survey, but that is not sufficient. You can certainly do that, but that is not sufficient. We have to be notified in this way so that we can take action in a timely manner and try to rectify whatever the issue was. The scores are reported to you basically immediately when you finish the test. You get a printout of your unofficial scores at the test center. We audit those unofficial scores to make sure that they were calculated correctly, and then they will be released 3 to 4 weeks after your test date. Usually scores are released within 3 weeks, I would say 2.5, 3 weeks after the test, but it can take up to 4, so be prepared for that. On that ada.org/OAT/PIN website on the left, there is a link to a section called My Account, through which you can track your application or any score requests you make. And it is also where your official scores will be posted once they are available, and then you can access them there at any point after that. I would just note in this that I always recommend to people that you test at least a month in advance of any deadlines there would be for your scores. Your scores are based on the number of correct responses that you made, and we use those number of correct responses, put it through a scale, and that determines your official score. I would just note there that means there's no punishment for guessing. An incorrect response is the same as a blank. So just make sure that you include answers to every question on the test. There are no passing or failing scores. This is an aptitude test. You're just gauged versus other people who took the test. 300 is typically average, maybe up to 320, depending on the section of the test. For more information on that, there is the OAT User's Guide that we make publicly available, and is what we hope the optometry schools are using to set what criteria they want to see in OAT scores, so you can get a sense of what the averages are in that document. There's a 90-day wait between testing attempts should you want to retake the test. If you didn't like your score, if something went wrong and we allow you to retest to replace your scores, there is no wait for that. You can test as soon as possible. But if your scores are being released, you just don't think they're high enough and you need to retest, you have to wait at least 90 days. After you've taken the test 3 times, you would need to provide us proof that you are actively applying to optometry schools in order to be approved to take the test again. That can come in one of the forms listed here, a copy of a completed OptomCAS application, a rejection letter, or a letter from someone at your school or a school you're applying to encouraging you to take the test again. This is just a list of the different resources that are available and where you can find them, what is available on our website, the application, the guide, the reference text, the practice test, any score request, that test accommodations request form, tutorial that walks you through what the test will look like, and the testing checklist that I shared earlier. On Prometric's website are some frequently asked questions. You can locate the test centers there. They also host the practice tests, and then there's a breakdown of what to expect on test day. If you should have any questions in general, you can check the website. You can contact us either through that phone number or that general email address. If you have any questions for me directly about what I have presented here during this presentation, you can feel free to email me directly, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And with that, I am happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Nick. And I just want to set a reminder for anyone attending this webinar. Please utilize the Q&A feature if you have any questions. Right now is the time that we're going to take in order to go over them now. And I have the first one for you, Nick. Is there fee assistance available for the OAT?
There is. We offer fee waivers on a by calendar year. So every year there is a limited number of fee waivers that are available. The request form for that is posted to the OAT website under Apply to Take the Test, generally in the middle of December. So December 15th, the request form will be posted on the website. It explains the different documentation that we would be looking for when you make that request. They are given on a first come, first served basis. And in recent years, we have been running out usually at some point in February. So if you are looking for fee assistance, unfortunately for 2021, they've all already been granted, that there are no more fee waivers remaining. But if you can push your test into 2022, or we're planning to test in 2022, just go in the middle of December to the website and look for that request form.
Could you speak to the relationship between the Association of Schools and Colleges of Optometry and the ADA?
Yes, so the ASCO, the Association of Schools and Colleges of Optometry, is the governing body of the Optometry Admissions Test. The Department of Testing Services within the American Dental Association is a shared service. We work for or do work for a number of different organizations. There's the Joint Commission on National Dental Examinations, which oversees the national board exams for dentistry. There's the Dental Admission Testing Committee that oversees the Advanced Dental Admission Test and the Dental Admission Test. And then there's the Optometry Testing Committee that oversees the OAT. And those are the governing bodies that are responsible for the rules and regulations of the test. They set the fees. They make all of the important decisions in that regard. The Department of Testing Services within the American Dental Association then enacts whatever policies and procedures they have put in place. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of accommodations questions.
Sure.
How current should the current comprehensive evaluation be? And could you speak to the accommodations review timeline? Like, how long does it take to learn if you've been approved for accommodations?
Sure. We ask that the documentation be from within the last 5 years, but there is leeway depending on the specific circumstances. If the reason that you were requesting accommodations is a well-established lifelong thing, say dyslexia, then the documentation doesn't necessarily need to be that current. Though what we may ask for in that situation, if the documentation is older than 5 years, we may ask for documentation that you are currently receiving accommodations at your school or have recently received accommodations at your school. Something like that. So the general benchmark is within the last 5 years, but if it's older than the last 5 years, that doesn't necessarily disqualify it. We may just ask for additional documentation. Was there a second part to that question?
How long is the review timeline?
It's generally just a couple business days. We have some pretty set guidelines on what we're looking for when we go through the review. So I would expect, if you get all of the documentation we need into us, I would expect that you should hear back within 3 to 5 business days, maybe even shorter than that, but I would say a week at most.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
So can test takers void the exam, and are no-shows reported to optometry programs?
No, in both cases. If you take the test, once you start it, those scores are going to be posted. You are not given the option to void them once you have seen them. That said, I mean, if something goes wrong during the test, as I was mentioning earlier, we would not release those scores. We would let you test in order to replace them. But if it's the case that you just wanted higher scores, you cannot void the scores you got. No-shows are not reported to optometry schools or anyone else. We would have record of the no-show, but it would not appear anywhere.
Okay. So I have a question more about the practice exam. So if a student were to order that same practice exam more than once, would those questions be different, or are they the exact same?
They are the exact same. So it is just one set of questions, whether it's the modules or the full practice test. Yeah, there isn't, you're not going to see different questions if you take it more than once.
And for the $100 OAT practice exam, will correct answers to all questions be provided? And if so, how?
No, I don't believe so, but that is a good question. Even if they are, I don't think that is something that you would want to spend a lot of time on, because like I said, you don't have a lot of time per question on the test and you can't go back. So I would, if you could email me that question, I will look into that further and get back to you, but I don't believe that they indicate what the correct answers are on the test.
Okay. Is the OAT graded on a curve? I know you mentioned earlier that it's more of an aptitude test, and mentioned as far as, the average score being 300, 320 in that range. Is there like more of a set scoring scale to provide as well?
It is not graded on a curve. That is, your score is not changed based on the performance of people who tested the same year as you, or the same month, or anything like that. Periodically, if scores in a specific area, if the average score is getting higher, significantly higher than 300, we may recalibrate the scoring scale so that the average goes back towards 300, which is where it's intended. But that doesn't happen very often. Certainly, it's not going to happen within a year of taking the test. So in general, no, that there isn't a curve. But for more information on that, I would say go to the OAT User's Manual that is posted on the website. It contains all of the information about how the test is scored, how we come up with the conversion scale, and then gives the breakdown of how people perform by year.
Okay. So for the secondary ID, for verification, would a voter registration card work? And could you give some examples of a secondary ID that could potentially work?
So a voter registration card, I have not looked at mine in a little bit. I'm not sure, because I don't know that it has a signature. If it has your name and signature on it, yes, that's fine. Really anything that fits those criteria, people use their AAA card, or some library cards have a name and signature on it. Some student IDs have a signature and name. Really anything that has your name and signature on it and is an ID would work, but most often we see credit cards and or debit cards.
Could you go over the materials that are provided on test day for test takers?
Certainly. It's basically just 2 pieces of note paper, and then in the pre-pandemic, it was 2 laminated sheets and then a marker. Given the pandemic, currently it is 2 pieces of paper and a pen or a pencil to take notes on. But generally speaking, it's going to be 2 pieces of note-taking material and something to write with, and that's basically it. If you fill up the 2 pieces of note paper, you can request more and they will bring you more. But automatically you're given 2 and then something to write with.
Is there a clock for each individual section, or just a timer for the 5 hours?
There is for each individual section. I would note that the survey of the natural sciences is split into like 3 subsections: biology, chemistry, and general chemistry. And so what you will see on the screen is the number of questions within that specific subsection. So the 40 questions in bio, it'll say 1 of 40, and it'll give you the time for the overall section, the 90 minutes for the full survey of the natural sciences. But that time is for all 3 of those survey of the natural sciences sections, even though you're only seeing the numbered questions for the section that you're in. But it is not an overall timer. It is by section. So survey of natural sciences, reading comprehension, etc. They all will have their own timer.
Thank you for that. As far as ID verification, are addresses verified on test day?
No, addresses are not verified. I think a lot of times people would have their home address, but have given their school address or something like that. We don't verify the addresses, just the names and signatures have to match. I should have also mentioned that we follow the guidelines in terms of expired IDs set down currently because of the pandemic. So I believe that through January 1st of next year, if your ID expired starting January 1st, 2020, that is still acceptable.
Are students able to visit the test site before their exam just to kind of get a feel of things?
Yes, actually, there is a I think they call it a test drive, where you can show up and go through the entire check-in process. They'll look at your IDs, they'll do the biometric scan and everything like that, everything up to actually taking the test. Yeah, there is actually a test drive. You would schedule that through Prometrics, sort of in the same way you schedule your tests. So that's a good question. Yes, that does exist.
Thank you. So during the exam, can students go back and forth during the exam in order to change or review answers?
Within the section that they are in, yes. So if you are in the quantitative reasoning section, you can you're given the option to mark questions, and then you can go to the review screen at any point. It automatically comes up once you get to the end of the section, but you can go to it in the middle of the section, and then you can jump to different questions that you marked or just questions that you had not answered. And you can change or input an answer. But once you move on to the next section, once you would move out of quantitative reasoning into physics, or once you move out of the survey of natural sciences into reading comprehension, you can no longer go back and change those responses.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about the OAT and how it's factored in schools' decisions. I know necessarily you can't really speak to that necessarily, but is there any bit of feedback or advice or anything like that that you can provide students?
I guess I would just say that, like I said, 300 is what we would consider to be average based on national performance. So you can consider if you got above 300, you got an above average score, or if you scored below, that's a below average score. That is generally how the schools are going to be looking at it. I think that Optomcast may have some information available, or the schools themselves may make information available about what they consider like the cutoffs in terms of minimum scores that they are looking for. But the only thing I can say is that over 300 would be above average and below would be below average.
Okay. So how early should test takers show up to the test center to make sure they have enough time to check in and start the exam?
I and Prometric recommend a half hour. So whatever your scheduled start time, that is supposed to be the moment that you start the test. So I recommend showing up 30 minutes before that, and that gives plenty of time to check in, put your personal belongings in the locker, go through the check-in and get seated.
How accurate is the unofficial OAT score, and does it ever differ from the official score?
I do not ever remember an official OAT score changing from the unofficial score. We just check to make sure that it was calculated correctly, and then more importantly, if something happened during your test and say the test center believed that there may have been cheating or something nefarious was going on. That's why we give that time between the unofficial scores and the official scores. But no, I don't believe a score has ever changed. So what you receive at the test center is going to be your score, almost certainly. I would personally notify you if the score, if there was going to be a change, but you can just assume that the score you receive at the test center is your score.
If an emergency occurs, do test takers need to pay to reschedule?
That depends. If say it's an emergency that closes the test center, then no. But let's say something happens 2 weeks before your test date and you just know you're not going to be able to test, then you would probably need to pay to reschedule, since you have enough time before your test to actually do that. But it all depends. You can always send documentation into Prometric asking that they waive the rescheduling fee, and they may or may not do that. But it usually depends on how far in advance of your test whatever happened.
Okay. And when's the latest that a student can reschedule their exam?
Up to 24 hours in advance of your testing appointment, as long as it's a business day. So if your test is on Monday at noon, you have until the preceding Friday at noon. So 24 hours in advance on a business day.
Give me one moment. I'm still going through a couple of questions here.
Sure.
I think we've answered a good amount of these questions. I have one right here. So you remember earlier during our session when you were talking about, if you select on the application, send your score to all schools.
Mhm.
After that, are students able to then remove schools that should not be able to receive that score, or they don't want to receive that score? Like, how does that whole process work?
No, once you request to have the score sent to that school, that cannot be changed. But I would also say there wouldn't really be much reason to do that. Let's say that you believed you were going to get a score that you didn't like, you didn't feel ready for the test. You shouldn't test in that case, but let's say that you decided to test regardless, and you just didn't want your scores to be made available to the schools. If you test it again, they would see both scores. Whenever we send your OAT scores, we send a complete history of all of your scores. So there's no way that you can like pick and choose which scores are going to be sent to the schools. And then, like I said earlier, if you end up not applying to the school and you had your score sent there anyway, my guess is they would never know that because they would never look.
Okay. Now, as far as the secondary ID, do debit cards count? And you know how in the back of a debit card, it typically has that signature portion. If a student just signs there, would that count as the secondary ID?
Yeah, absolutely. Credit card or debit card. That's exactly the way to make sure that it is accepted. It has to be signed on the back in that signature section there. So if you've written CID rather than putting a signature on the back there, that won't work. It has to have name on the front, signature on the back. But if it does, then yes, a debit card or a credit card are acceptable secondary IDs.
How soon after the exam are the unofficial scores made available, and how soon are the official scores made available?
Immediately. The unofficial scores are made available immediately as soon as you finish the test. You get a printout before you leave the test center. the official scores are then released usually 2 to 3 weeks after the test. It can take up to 4 weeks.
Okay. And do you have any parting words to provide anyone that's on the line as far as the whole process of taking the exam or anything?
I would just say make use of us. If you have any questions, we are here to answer your questions. We want to make sure that you have the best possible testing experience. So I would just say make sure that you go through that website, familiarize yourself with the guide and everything like that. So that would be my advice. Make sure you make use of all the resources we make available.
Perfect. Well, Nick, thank you for leading tonight's discussion. As always, SHPEP webinars are posted within a week of the live viewing on our YouTube channel. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with everything SHPEP and the health professions. Have a great evening, everyone.